Hello 8th graders. Today we're going to look at interpreting intercepts. Yesterday we looked at interpreting slope and y-intercept. Today we're going to investigate what does the x-intercept mean and what does the y-intercept mean. We first need to think about standard form. Standard form is where we plugged in the zeros and found the x-intercept, plugged in a 0 for x, found the y-intercept, and it was equations that had x and y on the same side. So ax plus by equals c. But we don't need to know both of those or have it in that form in order to find both the x-intercept and y-intercept. What we need to do is plug in 0 for y. That gives us our x-intercept. Plug in 0 for x, and we get our y-intercept. I'll give you a minute to copy this down. So let's recap that one more time now that you have it jotted down. The x-intercept is where y equals 0. So our y value is nothing and it's fully x. Our y-intercept is where x is 0, where we have nothing for x and the only thing we're looking at is y. Let's take a look at a sample to see the context of the situation. Here's the sample that we'll look at. You have $6 to spend on apples and bananas. Graph the equation 1.5x plus 0.6y equals 6, where x is the pounds of apples and y is the number of pounds of bananas. Interpret the intercepts. Once again, like yesterday, we said jotting down the sample problem is important to help us find the context and look at those problems on our work. It's important to have the words so we can associate the meaning when we go back to reflect on it. We'll give you a minute to jot it down. Once again, you have $6 to spend on apples and bananas. So $6 in total. Graph the equation 1.5x plus 0.6y equals 6, where x is the number of pounds of apples and y is the number of pounds of bananas. Interpret the intercepts. So the key thing that we need to do first is graph the equation, and then we'll work on interpreting what does that mean. Remember that when we have x and y on the same side of an equation, it's in standard form, and our easiest way to graph is using intercepts. That's where we said put a 0 in for x, see what y has to equal. Put a 0 in for y, see what x has to equal. And so let's do that. So looking at the x-intercept, if I put a 0 in for y, I have 1.5x equals 6. To get x by itself, we divide, and we get x equals 4. So this means when y is 0, we can have 4 for x. And similarly, we'll do that for y. We'll put a 0 in for our x, and we're left with the 0.6y equals 6. Divide by 0.6, and we get y equals 10. This should be a review from our last unit and what was on your unit test last week, Friday. Then, we need to plot this. X equals 4 goes on the x-axis. Y equals 10 goes on the y-axis. And so, we end up with, bear with me here a moment please, this for our graph. Let's see if I can make that better. There we go. So x is 4, y is 10. But what does that mean in the context of the problem? X is 4 when y is 0. Remember, y is the pounds of bananas. So if I buy 0 bananas, that means I can buy 4 pounds of apples, and just apples. On the other hand, if I buy no x, which is pounds of apples, so if I buy no apples, I can get 10 of y, which is our bananas. So if I buy no apples, we can buy completely bananas, and we would be able to get 10 pounds. And so that's what the interpretation of them is. The x-intercept, we can buy 4 pounds of apples if we buy no bananas. And we can buy 10 pounds of bananas if we choose not to buy apples. Now realize all the points on this line are other combinations that we could have. So let's take a look at 1. If we buy 1 pound, and we'll use this paper here to line that up. If I buy 1 pound of X, remember apples, how many pounds of bananas? Well, it looks like probably about 8. And so we could see all the different combinations. I could even buy a half a pound of something and see what it corresponds to. So the line represents all the solutions of the possible combinations, how we could spend our $6, but the intercepts represent if I choose just to buy bananas, choose just to buy apples. We'll take a look at one more sample today. Just like yesterday we looked at one in interpreting a graph, and so let's take a look at a graph to interpret together. At this time we're going to take a moment, and I'd like you to please paste in the graph that Mrs. Keys has for you today. So let me get that over here. Okay, so this is the graph we're going to look at. And the situation. We'll give you a minute to get that pasted in. Once again, the context of the situation is really important, and so let's write down the description. A bathtub drains very slowly. The graph represents the number of gallons of water remaining in the tub according to time elapsed. I'll read it again and then we'll talk about it. A bathtub drains very slowly. We can see that it's very slowly. It takes 15 minutes for this bathtub to empty, to get to 0. That's an intercept. We'll talk about it. A bathtub drains very slowly. The graph represents the number of gallons of water along the y-axis, according to the time that passes. And we'll slide this up just a little to identify our goal. Our goal is to be able to identify and interpret the x and y intercepts. So both the x and y intercepts, we want to know their values and what does it mean in the context of the situation. already alluded to this intercept here at 15. If we look at our graph, our y is gallons. Our gallons are 0 along the x-axis. And so our x-intercept is where the water is gone. The tub is empty. We have no gallons. And that occurs at 15 minutes. So our x-intercept means 15 minutes until empty. The y-intercept, on the other hand, is a 0 for minutes. So that means no time has gone by here, and we have 20 gallons. And so our y-intercept, just like the day before, is our starting point. We're starting with 20 gallons before it starts draining. So our starting amount in the tub is 20 gallons. Now, we're not going to write it down in our notes, but I want you to think about this. Yesterday, we looked at interpreting slope. Now, the slope isn't clearly defined here. We could count it out. I go down 20 over 15. So I have 20 over 15 as my slope, or down 20 should be negative 20 over 15. Negative 20 over 15, well, they're both divisible by 5. So I have negative 4/3. That means that every 3 minutes, 4 gallons of water go away. And so just because the slope isn't necessarily on this graph clearly between points, we can still count it out and find it. But the key for today, finding the intercepts. The x-intercept was 15. That's when the y was 0. Y was gallons of water, so at 0 gallons of water, it takes 15 minutes. For x being 0, x is minutes. Minutes are 0, we have 20 gallons. So minutes being 0 means our starting amount. At this time, you'll work on your assignment. It's a worksheet interpreting different equations and graphs.